make serious games sort of tackle subjects with real meaning, right? In some sense, when we talk about serious games, we're talking about making meaningful games, games that sort of engage topics in broader society in various ways. If we're going to build such games, of course, it behooves us to really try to understand how it is that games make meaning. Right? I will argue that there are two sort of primary sort of vehicles or semiotic systems through which games make meaning. The rules system and assets. Assets are things like, the pictures, the sound files, the textures, the pre-created animations, and so on. And these are all features of games that are shared with other media. Right, shared with cinema, shared with dance, and so forth. But rules, and really more generally kind of computational systems or code, are really unique to games as a medium. That games really is the medium that uses rule systems and computational systems to express meaning. One of the kinds of assets that are handcrafted in games are not only the kind of, the visual assets and the sound and so on, but oftentimes scripts. In a sense, interaction is treated in this sort of asset style where we hand create and carefully design finite state machines or other scripting technologies that explicitly describe the various paths through the game. We've been doing that kind of design for interaction for a long time. Those of you, some of you in the audience may have read the Choose Your Own Adventure books that were certainly very popular. In these books, you explicitly are presented with choices such as, the mouth of a windy and dangerous cave is described, and then it'll say, do you enter the cave? Turn to page 206. Do you run away? Turn to page 35, etc. That's exactly the same kind of interaction systems that are often employed in games today when we use kind of simple scripting technologies. Pong actually escapes the bounds of scripting. This would be the scripting way of doing it by having a playable model under the hood. A sort of a computational model that is dynamically computing the next state of the game as a function of the current state and the player input. And those kind of playable models, and in a sense the art of creating playable models, is really how we move the field of game design forward. I'm not saying that we want to get rid of human authorship. Quite the contrary. What I'm really interested in doing is moving that sort of loving crafting of gameplay up to a meta level. Right? Instead of lovingly crafting kind of a canned progression through the game, we really want to lovingly craft these emergent systems through which all kinds of rich and dynamic and infinitely varied gameplay arises. Playable models are simulations where, as the audience interacts with the simulation, it, in a very kind of detailed and moment-by-moment way, responds to activity, and responds to activity just so that a human being is able to, over time, form a useful mental model of what the underlying system's doing. They have to have a mental model that actually provides affordances for making gameplay choices that induce agency. The deep modeling of content is really more than just a way out of the content crisis. Deep modeling in content is useful because it does allow us to get beyond these production bottlenecks that are being hit, particularly in AAA current gen design. But more profoundly, it's really the key to creating new genres of playable media. So what is an operational logic? These are the abstract computational operations supporting interpretation that underwrite gameplay. These are sort of the raw material out of which you construct game mechanics, and they're fundamentally representational. These are sort of the units of meaning making that sort of couple computational representations with human signs, human readable signs. Graphical logics are the abstract operations associated with movement, collision detection, and physics. So these are sort of the units of computational and perceived meaning making that sort of represent objects moving in space, one simulated object colliding or touching another, and objects moving in space subject to physical rules. Such logics can be put together into higher level logics like navigation logic, right? If we think about navigating the maze in Pac-Man, the idea of navigation, a space of constraint that you can explore. And what I mean by a space of constraint is you can't go anywhere. There's some places you can go, some movements that are disallowed, and you have to figure out how to move in such a way as to cross the space while avoiding obstacles and so forth. You wouldn't be able to have the concept of navigable space without those two. What our mission is really about is creating compelling new forms of interactive entertainment that provide deeply autonomous, generative, and dynamic responses. And this requires deeply modeling and creating new playable models and operational logics around aspects of the experience that are currently static. What's sort of interesting about BioShock at a mechanics level are the sort of emergent paths through which you can do combat resolution. And that kind of thinking about what it would mean to create a playable model around that is really what underwrites a lot of the work we do in the Expressive Intelligence Studio. So this includes, modeling currently static aspects of the experience, creating new kinds of authoring tools that allow you to author these new kind of playable models. Because if you just sort of, come up with some, cool new simulation technology and it's sitting there in a vacuum like a unicorn, well, no one's going to be able to write experiences on that, right? You have to solve, in some sense, the authoring pipeline problem at the same time as you create new sorts of playable models and mechanics. I'm all for games that are more serious, right? And if you look at the definition, the dictionary definition of serious, this thing means things like requiring much thought or work. This is great. Not all games need to be fun. In fact, Facades often been critiqued in the gamer press for not being fun. Right? And it's like, great, it was never intended to be fun, right? Not all profound experiences are fun in that sort of Disneyland kind of sense of fun. Whee, I'm on a ride, It's like, no, there's all kinds of other sorts of aesthetic engagements and interactions with games we can create besides that set that's kind of lumped under fun. Of or relating to matters of importance. Great. I believe games are growing to be the predominant medium of the 21st century. Everything that we talk about in other media currently, in documentary film, in editorials, in newspaper editorials, in political campaigns, etc., will be expressed in game form. Already is being now and will be more so in the future. We already see emerging genres of things like editorial gaming, docu-gaming, the art games movement, and so forth. Yes, of or relating to matters of importance, I'm all for it. In a sense, this was kind of a prolonged 5-year experiment. It's sort of 5 years to make the game, in how do you turn that kind of social interaction into a game, which, as we've just seen, talking about playable models and operational logics, basically means how do you build playable models about psychological head games and conversational interaction. I just want to briefly sort of point out the major elements of the Facade AI architecture to sort of understand how that experience you're seeing is being constructed by the system. So the first thing to realize is none of that is pre-rendered animation. And in fact, most of it's not pre-animated. The faces are fully procedural. The eyebrow twitches, the eyes, the little eye rollings they do, facial expressions, emotional expressions are all being generated in real time, moment by moment, as a function of an emotional simulation and behavior state simulation in the autonomous characters. The autonomous character system is figuring out how to accomplish multiple goals at the same time. At its most complicated, there can be up to 24 simultaneous goals in one of these characters, either a trip or a grace, that they're sort of simultaneously satisfying. And we don't know until runtime how those are going to mix together, when a conversational topic is going to come up, where the player might be standing in the room. All of that has to be sort of dynamically worked out by the system. The drama management system is sequencing dramatic beats, and so we took the notion of a dramatic beat, which is sort of commonplace in screenwriting and playwriting, and kind of created an AI operationalization of it, where the system has this notion of these significant moments of multi-actor interaction, right? Kind of treating Grace and Trip as actors that are going to move forward the state of the narrative. And the system is dynamically kind of sequencing those and giving high-level directions to the characters to try to figure out how to act out that piece of content. So these things selected by the drama manager aren't just sort of played out as static content. In a sense, each selected beat is like a mini story machine, a mini story generator, which has to try to accomplish the dramatic goals of that beat while remaining real-time interactive to the activities of the player. The natural language processing system is doing partial parsing of surface text. What that means is it's not just keyword lookup. This isn't ELIZA or simple pattern matching. There is actually some amount of syntactic parsing going on. Our meaning representations are not semantic units, but they're really speech acts, like flirt, directed at a character, oppose, agree, thank you, refer to topic, and so forth. And any one utterance the player makes may actually trigger multiple. I like the couch could be a reference to the couch, a disagree directed at Grace, an agree directed at Trip, kind of all at the same time. And then the conversation manager, which is keeping track of the open conversational threads and kind of the state of the conversation across time, has to decide which subset of those are most important to respond to and how to respond to them in the context of the current beat that's operating, et cetera. This idea of making kind of psychological games units of interaction, I think is really powerful. And we went part of the way with it in Facade, but not all the way. And what I mean by that is the Facade architecture still doesn't actually have knowledge of the social games at an abstract level. And we as authors, Andrew Stern and I, had to kind of figure out how to take a given abstract game. And we didn't use any of Eric Berne's specific games, but we were kind of inspired by some of his games. So we had to figure out on our own as authors how to take an abstract game, combine it with some backstory material, and create a performance and create performance behaviors around it. Well, wouldn't it be nice if games could be authored in the abstract on their own? Right, that you could author, say, an affinity game on its own, and then have the system kind of auto-magically figure out, given two characters who happen to get sort of plugged into playing that game, have it figure out what conversation should take place, what backstory topics should get brought up, et cetera,